There are countless elements that go into making horror effective, whether that be in movies or in video games. Anything from the soundtrack to the creature design plays a huge part in having an impact on the player. However, even if everything is up to par, even if the antagonists have a terrifying design and the music and sound design strike fear in the player's heart, it can all fall flat due to a lackluster atmosphere. Atmosphere is not only often overlooked, but it is one of the most vital aspects when it comes to any media, not even just horror. Atmosphere is the deciding factor when it comes to having an effect on the player. Without a proper atmosphere to immerse, surround, and eat away at the player inside of it, there's a much lower chance that they buy the world that's being sold to them. Fair warning, there will be minor spoilers for every game I discuss in this video. One of the single best examples of this is in a free-to-play game called Liquidators. Atmosphere can be very, very hard to get right, as it really is just a combination of many different aspects of game development. Luckily, Liquidators absolutely nails every single one of them.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died. The Soviets may have been fairly quick to acknowledge the accident because evidence in the form of mild nuclear radiation had already reached beyond the Soviet borders to Scandinavia.
This news story does an excellent job setting the stage. It's brief, it's tragic, and it tells you everything you need to know about your mission. You're made aware that you're a liquidator tasked with combating the disastrous consequences of the 1986 Chernobyl nuclear meltdown. These liquidators were civil and military personnel providing many services like security, firefighting, and cleanup or quarantine of radioactive material, which is now on you. You must choose between three liquidators: Alexei Ananenko, Boris Baranov, and Valery Bezpalov. I probably butchered those, literally all of them, and if that's the case, I'm sorry. Alexei is able to interact with more electrical panels, Boris is more resilient, being more tolerant to radiation than his two comrades, and Valery is able to crawl through little vents the other two can't due to his smaller stature. Although these three men were together during the actual event, you have to go in one by one, equipped with only your Geiger counter and a flashlight. Once you step into the facility, it's silent. Besides your footsteps, the only sounds are the deafening rumbling of the facility's machinery, deep breaths through your character's hazmat suit, and the pulsing sounds emanating from the radioactive waste strewn across the inside of the facility. All of this is broken up by the sometimes unexpected piercing beeps of your Geiger counter, alerting you to hazardous radioactive material and areas. Despite what you may think while you're playing through Liquidators, there are no real enemies in this game. Nothing's going to jump out at you, there's no jump scares, no villains, just a very heavy atmosphere and the constant looming threat of death via radiation poisoning. Your health is indicated through the bar on the right of your Geiger counter with your tolerance at the top and current level of radiation at the bottom. Your tolerance will gradually decrease along with your radiation status gradually increasing, both depending on your contact and proximity with radioactive material. If these numbers meet, you will pass out, forcing the next unlucky liquidator to pick up where you left off. There are two things that make this game's atmosphere astoundingly effective. The first is death. When you lose a character, you respawn as someone else. However, it becomes apparent very quickly to the player that respawn isn't an appropriate word. You're not really respawning. After failing and having to go in as a different liquidator, you can actually find the unconscious bodies of the liquidators you've lost. You get your first sign of them before you actually enter a room, as they have a large green beacon of light that broadcasts the body. Turning a corner and seeing a physical reminder of your past failures is such a stupidly effective method of communicating the stakes at hand. There are a lot of horror games that have problems with keeping their horror actively horrifying. In many examples, jump scares or deaths lose their punch after encountering them 2 or 3 times because you get to just try again. There's nothing at stake, but knowing that you are in control and have more or less killed these people seeing their lifeless corpses in this dim facility, understanding that they're gone and you don't just get to respawn. It makes the entire experience that much more grim. The second specific aspect that I think is done really, really well is the developer's intent to make the flashlight effectively useless. I believe that this was a very intentional decision, as there are some areas where the flashlight does work. Basically, radiation can severely impact the effectiveness of electronics, which is why at some points your flashlight will flicker and occasionally cease working altogether, which is punctuated by a loud crack and an immediate thrust into darkness. Fuck. At which point you will have to locate and equip a new one. It's really only useful in a couple of areas, being immediately destroyed in most rooms of the game. This is an excellent design choice, really raising the tension in ways that most horror games fail miserably at. Despite the only enemies being the ones in your imagination, Liquidators is one of the most unsettling and tense horror games in recent memory. There are a lot of very intelligent decisions made from a design perspective here, especially grounding this concept in a real-life tragedy. With a story to go off of and real characters to try and connect to, there are things to focus on other than its heavy atmosphere. But what about when you have a lot less to go off of? That Which Gave Chase is a very strange horror game. Scratch that. That Which Gave Chase is a very strange game, one of the oddest that I've played in the last few months. This is primarily due to the fact that there isn't really a story to hook you in, not in the traditional sense, at least. This game has one of the vaguest narratives that I have ever seen personally. You could argue it doesn't really have one, but it does. Truth be told, I've had a very difficult time writing and talking about this game purely because of how open-ended and outright bizarre of a game that this is. That doesn't matter though, because that's not what we're here to discuss. My point in bringing up its vague story, or story lack thereof, is to say that due to the abstract take on a narrative, it makes it very easy to focus on the game's environment. As I said earlier, atmosphere is made up of many different aspects, from world design, visuals, sound design, etc. Not any one of these things is most important, so striking a balance between them and including all of them in a game can help to bolster the whole vibe. That Which Gave Chase takes place in a mysterious mountain range covered in snow. This is accompanied with several different scenes, which for the purpose of this video I'll call forest, mountain, and cabin. These desolate scenes are only ever paired with the howling wind, footsteps of you or your running sled dogs, and the sight of rapidly falling snow. You have the dogs, until you don't, and a strangely optimistic scientist who has drug you into this impossible region in order to find his now missing teammates full of researchers and explorers. He stays quiet most of the time, breaking the deafening ambience with the occasional reassurance that you'll both make it out of here alive after finding his friends. Although this initially comes across as a sort of cautious and unaccepting optimism, it very quickly evolves into a sinister one. You will often jump between several scenes in a manner that's very abrupt, sort of like this. This happens at many different points throughout the game's fairly short runtime, and is one of the main reasons why its story is so difficult to piece together. The timeline is entirely jumbled, with you playing through a section, jumping to another, and then coming back to play more of that section later. While not immediately apparent, this does become clear to the player later on. These rough transitions are a bit of a fright all on their own, but because of how frequently they appear throughout the game, it creates an atmosphere that never allows you to settle into it. By forcing you into unfamiliar environments every couple of minutes or so, it doesn't let you, the player, digest what you're seeing and feeling. It's important to keep the player on their toes. When on edge, whoever is playing the game will be inherently uncomfortable. Take my gameplay as a very specific example. This wasn't on purpose, it wasn't scripted for the point of this video, but even at a point in the game where there was no physical threat to me, I continued to constantly check behind me while traveling on my sled. This is what great atmosphere is able to do to the player. It infests their mind in a way that can't be done by the likes of a headcrab or whatever the fuck this stupid thing is from Soma. The reality is, a game doesn't need enemies to be scary. In the case of Soma, actually, the physical enemies are the least scary part of the entire game, which is really a shame. I'm not going to go into the immense detail of the enemies this game contains, because it kind of ruins the point of playing the game for yourself, and especially ruins the last 20 minutes or so. That Which Gave Chase is the only game here that has a traditional enemy, but that's not to say a video game needs one to be terrifying, which is something entirely perfected by Outer Wilds. What did you feel when everything cut out right there? When you were met with darkness accompanied by loud, uncompromising ambience? What did you feel? While Outer Wilds is not technically a horror game, I'm sure those of you who have played it will agree with me when I say that it has many elements that make it one of the most unsettling games I've personally played. In many stages of the game, music is largely absent. What music there is in the game all has a very express and intentional purpose when it's introduced, but we'll talk more specifically about that music in a minute. Even at the beginning of the game, when you wake up, you're met with a deep breath from your character as your eyes open and you stare up at the sky. Other than that, it's silent. You hear crickets chirping and the fire roaring beside you. As you will many times in your future, you approach your spaceship and soar into the expanse that awaits you just outside your home planet's atmosphere. Space is quiet. Aside from your ship's thrusters, there's nothing. Absolute, complete, dead silence. This silence is used masterfully to cater to the immense loneliness that you feel while playing through this game. Besides the occasional friendly face on each of these remote planets, you're entirely alone. This is a mystery space exploration game, but it uses every single one of those genres to its full capacity. One of the most effective things Outer Wilds does is using its locations to make you feel exactly the way it wants you to. Outer Wilds is a very existentialist experience. It very quickly goes from you exploring because you don't know what else to do to caring about a problem of intergalactic, impossible scale, but it was never supposed to be a mystery meant for you to solve on your own. Between the enormous celestial bodies facing you at every turn, to specific beasts as simple as this huge jellyfish below the surface of a sprawling, unending ocean planet, Outer Wilds does an absolutely astounding job at making you feel tiny. One of the most common primal fears that humans have is the fear of the unknown, which this game picks out and cranks to 1,000. Wherever you go in Outer Wilds, something is going to be unknown to you. By design, it only tells you precisely what you need to know to advance the narrative. While the universe's unknown elements, vast silences, and unexplainable creatures create an atmosphere worth being afraid of, its music gives you plenty more to shelter from. Even at times music is used, it's never overbearing. There's one specific track that I'd like to mention. This track is called End Times. It is a 2-minute track made to drive home each lonely, inevitable death that you face. The first time you hear this track, you will likely be confused, especially given how lacking most of the game is in the music department up until the first time you hear this. It begins with a few haunting, relatively quiet chords. Even without knowing what this sound means, it's anxiety-inducing. As the track ramps up in intensity, it signals you to complete your final scramble for information before it's too late. As your time runs out, the sun collapses in on itself and explodes in an assured and violent supernova, swallowing up all your familiar planets along with you. Despite its incredible DLC crossing more into horror territory than the main game, Outer Wilds has a lot in common with Liquidators, sharing its lack of a traditional villain and instead relying on its rich atmosphere to terrify the players. However, that's as far as I'm going to go into Outer Wilds. Like I said at the beginning, minor spoilers for everything, but even as minor as I discussed in this video is enough to hurt your experience of it. Go play Outer Wilds. Before I close this video out, I just want to briefly talk about Soma. I mentioned it in passing around the end of the That Which Gave Chase section, and it is truly an excellent experience. The enemy design sucks from a gameplay and actual design perspective. This was put really well actually by Joseph Anderson here.
The enemy robots don't even look scary. The first time I saw one, I ran right up to it to get a better look because I thought it looked cool, not creepy. It also feels like Frictional realized they weren't that visually intimidating either, and used that screen tearing effect to make it so you can't always get a great look at the things and have to fill parts of it with your imagination instead. Again, trying to convince you to be scared instead of being actually scary.
While the whole enemy portion of the game is done really poorly, everything else from the story, character writing, and is executed so fucking ridiculously, phenomenally well that I can't help but recommend you go experience it for yourself. I probably could make a whole video on Soma, or at least include it in a video about more cerebral horror games, and who knows, maybe someday I will. But this is all you're gonna get right now. If you've made it this far into the video, you have my sincere gratitude. A lot of people have joined the channel in the last few weeks, so I've grown a lot, for me at least, in a pretty short amount of time. With that being said, thank you to everyone who watched this video and everyone who's subscribed recently. If you did enjoy this video and you enjoy the rest of my content and you're looking for a way to support me and the channel, feel free to like this video and drop a comment below, as both do really help me out. If you're feeling super generous, you might as well subscribe too if you're not already. With that being said though, thank you all again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.